You know what my Halloween display needs? A gallows. So to start off with, I got plans for a gallows from a magician named Mark Shortland. So if you want detailed step-by-step plans, you're going to have to get those from him. I'm going to show you the overall construction and how I've adapted his plans to meet my own needs. I spent last night doing a little bit of some basic trigonometry to make sure all of my measurements come out approximately the way I want them. And then I'll also do some real-world measurements as I go. So hopefully by the end of this, everything will fit together. I guess if it doesn't fit together, you're never going to be seeing this. So if you're seeing this, presumably it worked. The nice thing about this particular design is that it's modular. It has a base, a leg, and then a top piece. So it'll be easy for everything to collapse down into just a few pieces to fold up for easy storage. That also means it's a little bit easier to put together because I can work modularly during construction. So I'm going to begin with the base. Now the base for this gallows is basically a large sheet of plywood that'll just sit flat on the floor, and then it just has a support structure that'll hold the leg of the gallows itself. My plan for the base was to get a 2 foot by 4 foot sheet of plywood to use as the base itself, and then to affix the support structure to that. I happen to have this scrap of plywood lying around, what, maybe a third of a sheet or so, cut lengthwise. This is just under 2 feet wide, which is a little disappointing. I wanted the 2 feet, but this is about 22 inches, and that's going to be close enough for my purposes. I'm certainly not going to go and buy another sheet of plywood just for that. So I've marked out just a little bit longer than 4 feet. I'm going to cut this down with my circular saw a little bit long, and then I'll take it to the table saw and square up the edges and make it closer to exactly 4 feet in length. That should do. Next thing I need to do is start building the support structure that I'll attach to the base. I need two 14.5 inch lengths of this 1x6 board. Because it's unwieldy, I'm going to cut it a little bit long, and then I'll cut it down to the exact size with the more manageable pieces. Okay, now this is a lot more manageable. I will measure out the proper lengths on this, and then we'll save the other board for other pieces later on. And because I want these to be the same length as each other, instead of measuring again, I can just put the one on top of the other and use it as my measuring stick. Now that I have these pieces cut down to the right length, I want to cut them to the right shape. I basically want to cut off 45-degree angles off of the top corners on both of these. So I've measured and marked out that area, and what I need to do is just cut off these 45-degree angle corners, and I can use my cheap little miter gauge to accomplish that. If you don't want to do that with the miter gauge on the table saw, you could also use a miter saw. I don't want to dig my miter saw out right now, so I'm going to use the table saw. To make things a little bit easier, I cut the same side of both pieces at once, and then again, to make things easier, I'm switching my miter gauge to the other side of the table saw to cut off these other pieces. Now for the other two sides of the support structure, I'm just going to use a piece of 2x4 because it needs to support a 2x4, so this is already the right thickness. I don't need the whole width of the 2x4 though, so I'm just going to cut it down to the thickness of a 2x4 is about 1.5 inches, so I'm going to cut this to about 1.5 inches square. And by the way, this is not a sponsored video, I'm not paid to say so, but cuts like this are why I really like the gripper from Microjig. This is the perfect push block for this kind of a cut. Now, as you can see, when this is in place, that's the perfect width to be able to slide a 2x4 in here. We just need to cut this in half so I can put one piece on each side. Now that I've got all the pieces, let's just do a dry test fit to make sure it all fits together properly. And just like that, that will hold our 2x4 in place. This support structure will just be glued onto the base. I may screw it as well, but the wood glue will be plenty strong. That'll hold the 2x4 so the leg of the gallows can just rest right in there. And I won't need to screw it down or glue it down because this structure is going to be strong enough to hold it in place. Again, the thing to remember, this is a prop, not an actual gallows, so it doesn't need to hold a ton of weight, so this will be plenty sturdy enough. Now let's go ahead and glue this support structure down to the base. I have a scrap of 2x4, since this will be width-wise, this will be the, or thickness-wise I should say, this will be the dimensions of the leg of the gallows that will go in, so I can use this as a spacer to make sure that I get everything arranged properly. I have the support structure here, and I have my little bottle of tight bond wood glue. So let's go ahead and get this thing done. We do have a few minutes to work before the glue gets totally set up, but we also want to work fairly quickly because we don't want anything to stick down until we know that everything's in the right place. Once everything's in the right place, we want it to go as fast as possible, of course, but that's just because I'm impatient. We'll actually give this glue plenty of time to dry before we move this thing around. And everything here is good. It's in the right position. We'll get this spacer out of the way so it doesn't accidentally get glued down to the thing. That would be bad. And carefully wipe away some excess glue around the edges. And now that's ready to go. I will let that dry while I move on to some of the other steps. The leg of the gallows that will go into that support structure and then support, I guess what we'd call the frame or the head of the gallows, is going to be one of the easiest pieces. It's just a length of 2x4, about 4 to 8 inches in length, so I'm just going to quickly cut that now. One of the things I like about this design is because it's modular, it can be height adjustable. And the way it's height adjustable is we run a dowel through the leg, and it can go in several different places, and the support that rests on top of the leg then can rest on different settings or different height settings, so it can be adjustable within several inches. So I'm just marking out several different lengths where I will drill holes for my dowel. Take a line for each of those. And I've also made a center line so I will know exactly where to drill these holes. Not that it needs to be exact. One of the nice things about this project is there are a couple of measurements that will need to be exact, but most of this can just be close enough. This is the dowel that I'm going to use. I believe it's 7/8 of an inch, but I'm going to hold it up to my Forstner bits just to make sure that I get the right width, or the right diameter. 7/8 should be this one. And that looks just about right. I'm going to try this on a test scrap just to make sure that I'm getting the right fit before I do anything else. So for right now, my drill press is down on the floor. I plan to make a cabinet or a cart for it. Haven't got around to that yet because I'm busy working on Halloween stuff, but I don't have that many holes to drill, so I can crouch down. I'll manage. But let's go ahead and try this out. So here's our test hole. Let's see if this dowel fits through. Technically it does, but it's such a tight fit, I think I'm going to go one size higher. Alright, let's see how this one fits. This is a little bit loose, a little bit wobbly, but I actually think that's going to be okay. I'm going to go with this. If that doesn't work, I'll get a new dowel of 1 inch in diameter and just sand it down a little bit, but I think this will work. Alright, now it's time to drill through the actual workpiece. And there we have it, the leg piece with 3 holes, making it height adjustable. Next, there's no reason for the dowel to be this long. It just needs to go through a couple of boards. So, I don't know, maybe I'll cut it to 6 inches or so. Doesn't need to be exact by any means. 6 inches would be right about there. Just make a little bit of a mark on the dowel. And we'll just cut that off. Now here's our height adjusting dowel. It'll just fit through one of these 3 pieces, or none of those pieces, and that will give us 4 different height adjustments. Now for the top of the gallows, it's basically an L shape and then a brace. The top and the vertical support, the vertical and the horizontal, are each 42 inches in length, so I'm going to cut those now. Perfect. So the way these are going to go is just like this. This will be the top piece, this will be attached to the leg, and then there will be a support across here at a 45-degree angle to help support the weight. In order to make this collapsible, most of the weight is going to be on that support piece, so I'm going to use a hinge here to hold these 2 pieces together. Now the next step is I'm going to take one of these pieces, the one that will be the horizontal piece, and use another piece of dowel. I just cut off another couple inches of the same 7/8 inch diameter dowel, and that needs to go into the end. So I'll drill a hole in the end, and then I'll put some glue and hammer this in, and that'll be a hook from which the noose can hang. The trick on this is we want to put it in at an angle rather than straight to prevent it from to prevent the noose from slipping off. So I need to be somewhat careful in driving a hole in at an angle. In order to do that, I think I'm going to just trace out some rough sort of guidelines. That'll help me follow where that hole needs to go. Somebody's calling me or texting me. They can wait. Well, it seems my camera battery died while I was testing the fit and getting that put in, but it's in now. That's in place, that's certainly not going anywhere. It's at an angle so nothing will slip off, and this is glued in with wood glue, so it's not going anywhere either. So that part is done. And now we need to cut out sort of a square box that will wrap around one of those 2x4s that'll hold the bottom of the frame, or the top piece, to the top of the leg piece. In order to do that, we just need to basically make a rectangular box that will fit around a 2x4. I've decided to make that about 19 inches in length. So I have this leftover 1x6 from the earlier piece. I'm just going to cut down some 19-inch lengths of this, and then I'll rip it to the appropriate width after I've got them cut to length. When I've ripped these to the appropriate width, these will fit on the long side of the 2x4, which means I need another piece that will cover the width of the 2x4 as well as the width of these two pieces. And I need two lengths, also 19 inches of that width. I have enough of this 1x6 left to get at least one of those pieces, so I will use that. Line. And that comes out to, that's about 3 1/16 inches. I was expecting 3 inches, and that's why you want to use real-world measurements, because you never quite know exactly what you're going to get. Now I'll just mark another 19-inch length on this piece. Flip it around so I'm supporting the longer piece, which in this case actually is the work piece, so that's all the better. And we'll cut that to length as well. And this little bit of leftover will be some other project somewhere down the road. But before I switch to my rip cut, while I've still got the miter gauge set up, I want to cut this furring strip down to 19 inches as well. This is going to be my other side. What I need now are for these to be all the same width as a 2x4, which is about 3.5 inches, but again, we'll use real-world measurements to get it exact. I'll set my rip fence so that it's just on the outside of that line. Just like so. Alright, there's the front and back. Now I just need the sides. And as we can see, those will all nest together just how we want them to. So I'm happy with this width. Okay, now I've readjusted the rip fence, but the problem is I need to cut off such a small amount, I'm worried that I might push the blade into the fence. In case of that, or to prevent that, I've clamped a sacrificial fence, just a furring strip, onto my rip fence. And then I readjusted the width, and I'm actually going a little bit less than I think I need, and I'll sneak up on it and try it in a couple of passes if necessary. I think that's good enough for government work. It's maybe less even than a 1/64 of an inch too wide still. That's within my tolerance. That's more than within my tolerance. I'm going to leave it there. And now it's time to glue these pieces to this 2x4, which is going to be the vertical piece of that top frame of the gallows. I think I'm going to do these one at a time because I want to make sure that I keep everything lined up properly, and just the way I'm going to have to clamp them, I feel like one at a time is going to end up being an easier job. I could be wrong. I probably ought to use something like strap clamps and do them all at once, but I'm not going to. I'm going to do these one at a time. Get a good amount of glue, because I'm not going to screw these. This is just going to be a glue job. Smoosh that around there a little bit. Line it up to the line that I already drew. I want these to overlap by about 5 inches. In fact, by exactly 5 inches, although the exact measurement doesn't matter, except that I want them all to be the same. We'll get a couple of clamps on it. Make sure we're straight. And I will let that piece dry. I'll come back in a few minutes and I'll get the next piece, and then so on and so forth until I've got all 4 pieces in place. I'm not going to worry about waiting for it to completely dry. I'm just going to let them dry enough that I can take the clamps off and move on to the next piece without worrying too much that I'm going to undo my work. And daylight is fading rapidly. I could set up lights, but I'm tired enough. I think I'm going to finish up tomorrow, so I'm just going to do this one last glue up on this piece. We'll do it the same way we did the previous. We will apply glue to the part that's already built, including that 2x4 across the middle to make it a nice strong joint. I just lost some lights, but I will deal with that. With the lights going out, I'm not sure how well you can see this, but it's exactly the same process as before. And again, I've left the 2x4 in as a spacer, the loose one. That'll sort of hold everything, make sure it's all, make sure everything's in order, let's say. Then once it's all clamped down, I can remove the spacer to make sure it doesn't accidentally get glued in place. Because wouldn't that suck to get through a project like this and end up having the wrong thing glued in the wrong place and have to basically undo the whole thing, because wood glue is wonderful stuff, but the thing about it is once it's set, it's let's say permanent. And that should be good. I'll leave that to dry for a while, and next time you see me, it will be tomorrow or perhaps the next day. I will be refreshed and not quite as tired, and I'll be in the light again. Alright, it's day 2, and I figure I'll start today off with some sanding. I have 2 things that I want to accomplish with this. First, the thing I don't really care to accomplish is a particularly fine finish. I don't need these to be smooth, perfect boards. This is a gallows, it's a Halloween decoration, it's meant to look a little bit run down, and in fact, at the end I'm going to age it a little bit anyway. What I do want is to sand it enough that it's not going to splinter when I handle it. I want to sand off all of the labels, the stamps from the lumber yard. And finally, and most importantly, when I took the clamps off of this joint, I guess you would call it, this box part, I found, unfortunately, it almost, but doesn't quite fit the lay the way it needs to. It only goes down about this far. It needs to go down about, this far. So what I'm going to do to fix that problem, because it's very close, I don't need to cut anything. I just need to sand this part of the lay so it's just a little bit smaller at the top than it is at the bottom. Okay, that's enough sanding for now. I'm not finished yet, but there's only so much sanding I can handle in one pass. So I'll finish the rest later. In the meantime, I need to start working on what's probably going to be the hardest part of this build, and that is this piece. I've laid out the L-shape frame of the top of the gallows, but the most of the weight is not supported right on this joint here at the corner, but by a brace that'll go here at 45 degrees across. So I'm using my carpenter's square and my speed square to lay this out, get a good sense of how everything has to go together, and then I'm going to start cutting some boards. Because this doesn't actually need to support the weight of a person, precision isn't everything, but we still want it to be as square as we can get it, so it's worth taking some time on this step to get the layout done properly. Yeah, I think it'll go about like this. So this will be 45 degrees, extending from one board to the other, and that will support most of the weight. The problem here is I want this to be removable so that this whole thing can collapse down for easy storage. That's part of the reason I'm using this design. In order for this to be removable, I can't just make a butt joint and glue it in place or screw it in place. So I'm going to have to use a mortise and tenon joint. The mortise and tenon joint becomes a little bit trickier because it has to be at a 45-degree angle on both ends, and because it needs to be removable, that means I can't use wood glue, which means the fit needs to be pretty close to perfect. So I need to really take my time and get the mortise and tenon joint cut properly. In order to do that, I think I'm going to leave this piece long. I'm going to cut one end to the 45-degree angle that I want, and then I'll start tracing out markings for where I want the mortise and the tenon to go. I'll cut one of them, get it in place, and then I'll be able to measure the other one. I'm pretty sure that's going to be the game plan I need to use. Now I've set my miter gauge to 45 degrees, but especially because I'm just using the cheap miter gauge that came with the table saw, I don't want to trust the markings on the gauge itself, so I'm going to use my speed square and make sure that that is actually 45 degrees from the blade. Like it's good, so I'm good to start making this cut. And as I said before, the plan is to leave this too long and then use relative dimensioning to get it down to the proper size later. That way I know I get an exact fit. So all I need to do is just take a tiny little bit off at the end to get the angle for now. And as we can see with the square, that is a nice 45-degree angle, exactly what I need. Now this is approximately where I want the piece to go. I'm going to use my speed square and just move it around a little bit until I get a good sense of exactly how I want it. Right there seems good, so I'm going to make some marks just to trace around where that is. I'm going to trace that on the support. And I'm also going to mark the line across the piece that will be the tenon piece. Now the plan here is I don't actually want this angle tenon with this sharp corner because that could break off. Particularly since I'm not using any wood glue. Once this is under pressure it could break off. So what I actually want is to cut the tenon approximately like so, which means I need to mark the point of contact on the other piece in both corners, and then we'll make a line there, and we'll make a line here. Now, this is the part that actually gets removed when I cut my mortise. And on this piece, these will get removed, leaving me with a nice tenon there. Now, this is the piece in which I need to cut the mortise. As you saw on this side, I'm planning on cutting out a mortise of approximately this size. I want it also to be the middle third approximately of the piece. So this area is the part that I've marked out to cut the mortise. So in order to get started, I drilled a 1/2 inch pilot hole right into the workpiece just with a cordless drill, because on my router the bit hangs down a little bit too low and I want it to be flush with the surface, so I've just made a little place for the bit to go. I am using my cordless plunge router and a 1/2 inch up spiral mortising bit, so this should make quick work of this project. I've set the fence so that everything is lined up properly. Let's give it a go. And that should do. It's not perfect. The router slipped at one point there, but it's good enough. The one other thing we need to think about is using this method with the router instead of something like a mortising chisel means we have rounded edges, but when we cut our tenon on the table saw, we're going to have straight square edges. So we need to either use a chisel to clean up these edges or do something to round up the edges of the tenon. I'm going to decide that later. Now that the mortise is done, we go to what's probably going to be even the harder part, and that is getting this tenon cut. I have a reasonable game plan, but I'm kind of figuring this out as I go along. I've never tried to cut a mortise and tenon joint at a 45-degree angle before, so this is a bit of a learning experience. But I think what I'm going to do is cut off these ends first, so that then I will just have the straight piece, even though it's kind of still at a 45-degree angle to the board. At least I only have to worry about some straight cuts. So that's what I'm going to try to do. Okay, that's good enough. I actually made a mistake and cut a little too far on that side, but that's not a through cut, and this doesn't need to support a lot of weight. I don't really care if it looks like it's got a little extra nick in it, so I think this is still good enough. This should still be a usable piece. Now I need to cut the tenon itself. I need to make shoulder cuts here and here at 1/2 inch, approximately 1/2 inch depth, so I'll leave that 1/2 inch in the middle, and then I'll use a tenoning jig to cut the cheeks and actually make the final cuts. And because these are not going to be through cuts, I can use the miter gauge and the rip fence at the same time. So I can use my fence as a sort of stop block. And that way I'll be able to line up these cuts perfectly. That should do, and then I just need to get the right thickness. And I'm going to cut this a little less than I think I'm going to need, because I'd rather sneak up on it than cut too much. So there's our shoulder cuts on either side. Normally you would make shoulder cuts on the ends as well, but in this case I've already cut this down to the appropriate size, so we just need the cheek cuts. We need to just cut off this side and this side so that we only have the 1/2 inch down the middle. In order to do that, we're going to use a tenoning jig. This is a tenoning jig that I built based on a design from another YouTuber, 3x3 Custom. It has holes here, so you can put your clamp through on either side, and it has these knobs on the back that allow you to turn this support so it's adjustable, so you can make either a vertical cut or an angled cut. In our case, we're going to be at a 45-degree angle. All we need to do is put our workpiece in the jig. Then we just need to adjust it so that the flat end of the workpiece is flat down, and our support will support it at our 45-degree angle. So we just tighten up these knobs, and then this whole thing will slide back and forth. It's a bit of a tight fit on mine, but it'll slide right across the brick face. Now we need to adjust our blade height. I want the blade to go just into that shoulder cut that we made, but not exceed it. Then of course we need to take extra care to line up. I actually want to go just shy of the line, because I don't want to accidentally take too much. As I've said, I want to make this a little too big and sneak up on the right dimension rather than accidentally cutting it the wrong size. Lock down my rip fence. This is a bit awkward because I'm afraid I'm going to hit my head on there, so if you do this, be careful with that sort of thing. And it's always fun, as another YouTuber said, to wave goodbye to this piece as it flies off at the end. Now we just need to turn everything around to get the other side. I just checked on the other piece, and it seems like I need about 1 blade's width on each side more to come off. So since we're set up on this side to start with, I'm going to just put this back and take another pass, taking just a little bit more. So here's our test, hopefully the final one. There we see a nice fit. Now obviously this won't go all the way in yet because I haven't either squared up these edges or rounded these edges yet. That'll be the next step, but you can see that it does indeed fit as it's supposed to. So I think I've decided to round up the edges of the tenon. And that's small enough that just some sandpaper ought to get the job done. Almost. You can see probably how close that is to fitting. Just a little bit more. And there we go. A nice fit. Seems pretty strong. I'll clean it up a little bit later, but I'm happy with how that came out. But unfortunately, now that that's done, I have to go get on a Zoom call that I really don't want to have anything to do with. But that's okay, I will do that, and I'll be back out either later tonight if there's enough time, or maybe tomorrow if it gets dark before my Zoom call ends. In any case, stay tuned for part 3. And on the 3rd day, he rose again, though admittedly I'm feeling a bit more like a zombie than the Messiah. In either case, I have work to do. I'm planning to finish the gallows today. There's honestly not all that much left, although some of it involves a couple of tricky cuts, so it's going to take a little bit of time. Basically, all I need to do today is finish these mortise and tenon joints to get this diagonal brace attached to the top. Then I need to put a hinge here in this corner to attach the vertical to the horizontal piece. That doesn't need to be a load-bearing support, it just needs to sort of hold everything together, keep everything straight. Then I do a little bit more sanding, put everything together, test all the fits of everything. Hopefully it'll all fit properly. I know one piece still needs a little bit of extra work to make it fit, but that won't be a problem. And then the last step, I have a little bit of painting to do to make it look not quite so much like fresh, clean, nice lumber. And so the first thing I need to do is take some measurements on this diagonal brace to figure out exactly what length I need to cut in. I've put the mortise and tenon joint together here on this end, so then I just need to arrange everything on this end so that I can check the fit and draw some marks where everything needs to line up. Looks pretty good. And this first cut doesn't need to be exactly precise, it just needs to be pretty close. And that is to make a mark on this board so I know what length to cut this board. I want it to go about halfway through, which is right around there. I'll clean up that mark in a moment. Now we can take this apart. This angle piece is the only one I need to work with for just a moment. I'm going to use my speed square to make this line accurate and actually 45 degrees as I want it. There we go. Now I have this line. I'm going to measure it one more time just to make sure, but assuming everything still lines up properly, assuming everything hasn't shifted while I was measuring, then this should be the appropriate length. If I cut it here, and this should just fit right in there as a nice 45-degree angle brace. Now I've set the blade to the appropriate height, and I've set my miter gauge to 45 degrees. Again, I never quite trust this to be an exact 45 degrees, so instead of cutting to my line, I'm going to cut off a test cut first and then use my square to just make sure that I'm actually getting an accurate 45 degrees. And I am in fact getting an accurate 45 degrees. Now all I need to do is cut accurately to my line. And once again, this just needs to go approximately halfway through the other board. So if it's a couple of millimeters off, no harm done. It just needs to be very close to accurate. Alright, let's put this back where it belongs and arrange this piece. And that's a good fit. I'm happy with that. So now I just need, as I did before, to mark out the cuts for the mortise and tenon. It's worth taking some extra time on this step because this fit needs to be probably the most precise of all of the components of this project. Because if this doesn't fit, the other side has already been cut, so it can't be adjusted. So I need to tailor this measurement, or this fit, exactly. Okay, looks pretty good. And so as I did before, I'm going to use the plunge router with the 1/2 inch up spiral mortising bit. The advantage of the up spiral bit is it removes at least some of the sawdust as it goes, and the reason I'm using a 1/2 inch is because that way the width of my mortise is the width of my bit and I don't need to make multiple passes. So let's get the rest of these boards out of the way, clamp everything down and get started. And that should do. Alright, that looks pretty good. And one thing you'll notice is that as I was going, I did not try to take it all at once. I took small passes, plunging a little bit deeper each time. That just prevents it from bogging down the router too much. Takes a little bit longer, but that's the best way to do it. Now I'm going to double check the alignment of the tenon piece to make sure that I'm going to cut off the correct pieces when I do my cutoffs. That seems to be correctly aligned. So again, I'm going to cut off this piece, and then I'm going to cut off this piece. So yesterday I tried to cut one of these pieces off in a rather foolish way and almost had something of a catastrophe. It came out okay, but I'm going to try a smarter way today. This morning I remembered that I recently got this oscillating tool, so I've put a wood cutting attachment on it. I'm going to see how it does with taking the end off of this. Well, kind of an ugly cut, not perfect, but good enough. I'm reasonably happy with how that went. I'm still going to use the table saw to cut off the other side though. And now we have a nice rectangular piece from which to cut our tenon, as we did previously. Now you can clearly see this will fit into the mortise. As before, it doesn't quite go all the way yet because I still need to round these edges. So that'll be the next thing for me to do. That looks pretty good. Let's try putting the other piece in and just see how everything aligns. The one thing that didn't come out quite right was just this little bit here. This was meant to be flush with the other board, but I actually don't care if it overhangs just a little bit. I think that's fine. I think it looks fine. It's just one of those little inaccuracies that crept in at some point during the build process. Now the big question is whether this structure is going to support everything properly. I think that it will. Let's just flip this over and see. Yeah, without the hinge, it's wanting to pull a little bit to that side, but it doesn't need much force to just hold it straight, and then it should be able to support a lot of weight. So as long as I get that hinge put there, everything should be good. Now it's time. I'm going to clean up some of my tools, and then I'll move on to the next step. Well, yesterday I started my sanding, and I don't particularly like sanding, so I got tired of it and left the rest of it off until today. And now my procrastination has finally caught up with me because it's time to finish sanding. I did remember that I have this electric hand planer, which is going to make part of my job a lot easier. I started yesterday thinking about sanding this down because this piece, this leg piece, needs to fit into here. And as you can see, it almost fits but doesn't quite. It gets jammed up. So this just needs to get a little bit smaller. I was going to just sand it down, and sanding it down would work, and I had actually started doing that. But as I said, I got tired of it, and now I remembered I have this planer, so this should make quicker work of it. So let's give that a go. Let's see how that fits now. Now we've got a perfect fit. That was much easier than using the orbit sander, so I'm glad I remembered I had that. However, all good things must come to an end, and I can't use the planer for the rest of this. Now I just need to sand everything down to smooth-ish. Again, I'm not looking for a fine, perfectly smooth finish. I'm just looking for no splinters and get rid of all of these stamps from the lumber yard. And for that, we do need the random orbit sander. So time to turn on the vacuum, turn this thing on, and spend a godforsaken amount of time sanding all of this wood down. Fun. Alright, I'm still not finished, but I think you don't need to watch me sand wood down. Everyone knows how sanding works, so I'm going to turn the camera off, finish this up, maybe grab a snack, come back and finish this up, and then I will be back to show you the rest of the build and the rest of the steps later on. Okay, now everything's sanded. The next step, and the last step of construction before I paint everything, is to install a hinge. I have two different kinds of hinges. I'm just deciding which one I want. I think I'm going to go with this one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mark these holes, and then I'm going to drill pilot holes, and then I'll take everything apart and screw it in. The wonderful thing about these is the information on the back of the packet of hinges tells me exactly what size of pilot hole I need to drill in order to use the screws that come with it. In this case, I need 5/64 inch pilot holes. One side ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and actually screw this in now while I've got this clamped in place. I could do all the pilot holes first, but since it's clamped down, why not? Alright, that's done. Let's unclamp. And hopefully... And there it is. I'm pretty happy with how this came out. I did have this problem where when I tried to put the brace back in after installing the hinge, I didn't foresee this problem because I'm an idiot apparently. In order to put the brace in with the mortise and tenon joint, this top horizontal piece has to swing upward a little bit, and the hinge locking everything in place prevents that. However, it has just enough wiggle side to side that I'm still able to sort of twist the piece to one side, pop the mortise and tenon in, and line everything up. So, not a perfect fit, but it's actually still seems pretty sturdy, and I'm reasonably happy with the way it all came out. So, I'm calling this a victory. So originally my plan was, once it was all built, to take it apart and put some black paint on, and then once that dried, sand it a little bit, rough it up, make it look sort of aged and used and like the paint was peeling away. However, once I finished, I actually kind of like this unfinished, rougher look. However, I don't want to leave it completely unprotected, nor do I want to really change its appearance much. I also just think this pine color will show up better at night rather than the black paint. And since this will be used at least some of the time as a Halloween decoration, I want it to show up at night, so I've decided to just go with clear spray lacquer to give it a finish, keep it protected, but not change the appearance too much. I also like this stuff because it dries very quickly, and because it's a spray, it's really easy to apply, so I don't really need to worry about it too much. Now I'll just wait for that to dry, get the other pieces, and we'll be done. And so here it is, all dry, ready to go. A little too tall to actually film in the garage, so I'm going to set it up here. But it consists of the base, the leg that goes right down in there. Then we put our spacer here, so we can adjust to whatever height we want. And we can just assemble this with the mortise and tenon joint, just like so. And then the whole thing goes on top. And so there it is. Then we just tie up a noose, hang it from the hook, and we can hang a skeleton or use this as a magic prop, or in fact, whatever you might want with the gallows. It won't support a human's weight, but we're not actually hanging people, so this is good enough. Now that we have a gallows, we just need two more things. We need a hangman's noose, and we need somebody to hang from the gallows. Some skeleton or dummy or something. The latter of those you'll be seeing when I make a video of setting up my haunt, where you'll see all of my decorations. The former, however, we'll do right now, which means we just need some rope. This is a soft white cotton rope that magicians like to use. There's nothing tricky about this rope. Magicians just like it because it's soft, it cuts easy, and because it's white, it shows up well on stage. I happen to have a lot of that around because I am a magician, so that's what I'll be using for my noose, but any rope will do. To begin tying the hangman's noose, just separate out a length of rope, put your finger down, and double it over like this, so that you have sort of 3 lengths of rope or 2 loops. We'll just slide that to the side a little bit so that you can see better. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take this piece and extend it while we sort of pinch in the middle here. This will be the piece that we use to wrap around. You can wrap it any number of times. The more you wrap, the more decorative it looks. I think 13 is a good number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 times around. Then we need to take this loose end and tuck it through this, this loop that we've left over here. Then we need to pull from this end while holding this so it doesn't pull back through. We just pull from this end to tighten up that loop. And now that's nice and tight. You can cut the excess off of this end if you want to, or you can just leave it dangling like so. This other end will of course pull out, or you can pull this way to loosen or tighten. But there is your hangman's noose. And then to actually hang something, you just tie whatever knot you want in the other end. Doesn't matter what knot you tie, you just need something to hang off of the hook on your gallows. And so there's our simple little hangman's noose. You've already seen the gallows, so I think we're just about done here. As I said, you'll be seeing which of my dummies or plastic skeletons or whatever I decide to use with the gallows in my Halloween decoration when I make another video explaining all of the different decorating choices that I have made this year. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that. Or indeed, so you don't miss any of my horror-related goodness, including book reviews, movie reviews, discussions of gaming, prop builds, and anything and everything else related to horror. But in the meantime, I need to sign off so I can go do some more haunting. So until next time, take care and stay scared.